The Department of Foreign Affairs warns the public against falling for false narratives after China's threat to release an audio recording supposedly proving that a high-ranking Filipino army official agreed on a new model in Ayungin Shoal. In a statement on Thursday, May 9, DFA spokesperson Teresita Daza says releasing unverifiable recordings of supposed conversations between officials could indicate attempts to sow discord between the Philippine government and the Filipino people. The DFA further reminds diplomats to strictly adhere to the 1961 Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, which states their duty to respect the laws of the receiving state and not to interfere in internal affairs of that state. According to a media report on Wednesday, May 8, a Chinese embassy diplomat and Armed Forces of the Philippines Western Command Chief Vice Admiral Alberto Carlos had a phone conversation purportedly talking about the new model pact for Ayungin Shoal. Defense Secretary Gibo Teodoro said he did not want to dignify what he called China's barking about holding audio evidence of the supposed new model for Ayungin. On May 7, the DFA emphasized that only the country's chief executive can authorize agreements entered into by the Philippine government on matters pertaining to the West Philippine Sea. The Philippine economy grew by 5.7% in the first quarter of the year amid stubbornly high inflation and elevated borrowing costs. The gross domestic product growth in the first quarter of 2024 is faster than the 5.5% expansion recorded in the final quarter of 2023, according to the Philippine Statistics Authority. However, the GDP growth in the first quarter of 2024 fell short of the government's target for the period. It is also slower than the 6.4% expansion in the same period in 2023. The Marcos administration has set its GDP growth target at 6 to 7% for this year. Some analysts said chasing a 6% growth would be difficult for the Philippines as long as interest rates remain high. According to the PSA, the main contributors to the first quarter of 2024 growth were financial and insurance activities, wholesale and retail trade, repair of motor vehicles and motorcycles, and manufacturing. After making adamant declarations that the Philippines would not cooperate with the International Criminal Court in arresting former President Rodrigo Duterte, the Marcos administration is still preparing for all legal options 2002 treaty that established the court. In a press briefing on Wednesday, May 8, Assistant Justice Secretary Mico Clavano says the legal brief being prepared would be an objective statement or an analysis of the pros and cons of each option to guide President Bongbong Marcos on how he will move. According to Clavano, if ever the ICC issues an arrest warrant, President Marcos would know what his legal options are. Clavano later says in a message to reporters that the legal brief would be done with an awareness that policy frameworks may evolve. He says Marcos had long ordered the DOJ and the Office of the Solicitor General to study the possible legal issues. On Tuesday, May 7, former Senator Antonio Trillanes IV said the ICC may issue an arrest warrant against Duterte by June. He said the warrants would be issued in batches and it could spill over to July. Despite its lack of information on when the ICC might order Duterte's arrest, Clavano says the Department of Justice is already studying the legal aspects, including the pros and cons of rejoining the Rome Statute. Duterte is facing a crimes against humanity case before the ICC in connection with the bloody war on drugs during his administration. In March 2018, Duterte declared the country's withdrawal from the Rome Statute or the treaty which established the ICC. The withdrawal took effect a year later in March 2019. Despite this, the ICC retained jurisdiction over alleged crimes in the Philippines from November 1, 2011 to March 16, 2019, while the country was still a state party. The Supreme Court rules that the practice of red baiting or red tagging is connected to the use of threats and intimidation, putting the labeled individual at risk of enforced disappearance or extrajudicial killing. In the landmark decision written by Associate Justice Rodil Zalameda, the High Court says that inherent to the practice of red tagging was the use of threats and intimidation to discourage subversive activities. But it says being associated with communists or terrorists could make a red-tagged individual a target of vigilantes, paramilitary groups, or even state agents. In a 39-page decision, the Supreme Court says a writ of amparo becomes necessary in this situation. A writ of amparo is a remedy available to any person whose right to life, liberty, and security has been violated or is threatened with violation by an unlawful act or omission of a public official or employee or of a private individual. The Supreme Court's pronouncement is contained in its ruling on the case of Sigfred De Duro, an activist and the vice president for the Visayas for both Bayan Muna Party List Group and the Makabayan Coalition. De Duro filed a petition for a writ of amparo before the Iloilo Regional Trial Court, alleging that he was red-tagged by the military, which accused him of being a ranking member of the Communist Party of the Philippines, New People's Army. However, the Iloilo court dismissed his petition, finding his allegations of red-tagging insufficient to be considered a threat to his life, liberty, and property. The case was elevated to the Supreme Court. In its decision, the Supreme Court is requiring the Iloilo court to conduct a summary hearing. The Supreme Court reminds judges to be mindful of the different power dynamics in their assessment of an actual or future threat to a petitioner's life, as well as in their evaluation of the existence of substantial evidence to support a grant of the privilege of a writ of amparo. It adds that a refusal to acknowledge this reality leads to the denial of protection.